you all for coming tonight. My name is Trey Gaines, for those of you that don't know me. On behalf of the museum staff, we're glad to have you this evening for a very special program with Kenya Robbins. Before I get started, let me give a couple of announcements of upcoming events. Our next luncheon run will be on March the 16th, Wednesday. One of the curators from the Carlos Museum in Atlanta will be here talking about how they use their collection in their work down there at the museum. March 19th, we're participating once again with the Cartersville Downtown Development Authority Pub Crawl. That's an event where you get to buy a ticket to the DDA website. You get to patronize the local restaurants and bars downtown. And if you buy a $10 add-on ticket, you get to come to our concert with Celtic Kudzu, which is a Celtic band. Landlocked. Celtic Kudzu is no band. Landlocked, which is a Celtic music band. They're great guys. We're really start having them. So I encourage you, if you're interested in that, buy a ticket to that. And then on March 31st, our next evening lecture, which will be next month's evening lecture, we've got our own Jordan Duncan will be here. Jordan is one of our educators at the museum, and he's going to give a talk on the history of iconic toys and action figures and all things pop culture and games and things going on with the exhibit for us next month. And we told him about it this afternoon. We asked him if he could do that for us, and you should have seen his face. He just went up and said, "I will talk all day long." Great. Just give us an hour. So he's very excited about that. We hope he'll come out and join us with that. Lauren, am I forgetting anything?
No, that's it.
Well, without further ado, we'll get on to our main attraction for the evening. Mr. Kenya Robbins is a native of Floyd County and the city of Rome. He graduated from Rome High School in May of 1999 and soon afterwards started a career in banking. In 2008, Kenya decided to leave the banking industry and start a career with funeral service. There's probably a thing here or something. There's something there.
Right.
In 2010, he began his educational studies at Upton Jones College of Funeral Services and graduated in August of 2011. In 2014, through the state of Georgia, Kenya received his funeral directors and embalming licenses. Kenya is the father of 3 children. He is employed at Mack, Eppinger and Sons Funeral Service here in Cartersville, and truly has a passion for serving the Bartow County community, as well as the surrounding counties. And his desire has always been to serve the people and to make a positive impact on everyone who comes into contact with him. Please join me in welcoming Kenya.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Trey, for the introduction. And I'd also like to thank Pastor Young Harris for thinking of me to come and be with you all this evening. I'm not a public speaker. I'm just a public servant. So it's certainly good to be here. And also, excuse my tardiness. I tell a lot of people a lot of times, I say, I'm late for a lot of things. I'm late for church. I'm late for certain events, parties, and everything. But one thing I will not be late for, and that's your funeral. That we're not going to be late. We're not going to be late starting the funeral. We will be on time. So, but yeah. So, as you already heard, I've been in the industry for about 14 years, and people always question, how did you go from banking to funeral service? I said, it's all customer service. It's all customer service. It's all serving in some form or another. So I just went from dealing with people that are living to dealing with people that have passed on to the next life. So it's kind of one end of the spectrum to the other, and people always question it, but it's what God called me to do. So I'm just going to walk right on into it. So I'm not going to be before you long. As I said, I'm not a public speaker. I just know a little bit about what I know, and I'm going to try to enlighten you all this evening about the history of the African American funeral service and funeral homes. So the history of the African American funeral service, it has its roots in the ancient Egypt times, beginning in 3200 BC. Ancient Egyptians were an African country ruled by African people, whom historians credit for developing techniques of embalming and preparing dead for funeral services. The practice were elaborate using cloth, spices, and special techniques to preserve the bodies. The practice of preserving the body for a long period of time and placing them in a container for funerals and burial was started by the ancient Egyptians and people of color. This is a common practice observed throughout the world today. In America during slavery, it was against the law for black people to bury their loved ones and have services for them. So they didn't receive a proper burial. In the early years, in slavery, they prohibited families from gathering in any form. Slaves could not assemble or meet as a group for the fear that they would revolt against the master. If they broke those laws, the slaves were often beaten or killed. The deceased slaves were usually buried without a ceremony on a non-crop producing land, unmarked, sometimes dug by slave children too young to work in the fields. Therefore, the first African Americans were denied the opportunity to mourn their loved ones. They were denied that opportunity and were not given a chance to publicly celebrate the life lived. But when members of the master's family died, house slaves were given the responsibility of washing, preparing, and dressing the dead. They also had to plan the repast, which is the gathering of the family and friends after the funeral. Eventually, slaves rebelled. And when they rebelled, slave owners were forced to make changes and concessions in order to keep the peace. They began to allow families to live together, but that did not stop them from separating and selling them if they chose to. With the introduction of Christianity, slave owners began to allow slaves to meet for religious services and funerals. Whites were reportedly shocked at the behavior of slaves at funerals because they were happy, they were jubilant, and they celebrated the homegoing of their loved ones. The slaves understandably had hope of returning to their homeland. So death was seen as going to be with Jesus and symbolized going home. Death was also seen as a relief from the agony of humiliation of slavery. Slaves looked forward to leaving their raggedy shacks for their mansions in the sky. During the Civil War, black slaves were responsible for removing dead bodies from the battlefields and kept record of burial sites for soldiers killed in combat. Embalming was necessary to preserve the bodies of Union soldiers. Embalming was necessary to preserve the bodies of Union soldiers killed in the South, so they could be shipped back home for the services and burials of in the North. Black assistants in the military doctors were trained and did much of the embalming. Given the fact that black slaves prepared the dead, dug graves, and maintained the cemeteries, blacks were the most prepared for occupants in funeral service. Funeral parlors, as they were called back in those days, were among the first businesses opened by blacks. After slavery was abolished around the 1900s, black churches began to form burial societies. They collected money from church members to pay for the funerals, the coffins, and the graves. This is a forerunner to what we now know as pre-need funeral plans, where a person can pay you in advance monthly towards your funeral. Black funeral homes began to open their doors at this time because there was now money to support their businesses. In the early 1900s, most black lived in rural communities, which my family calls in the country. And the whites lived in cities. Therefore, the first funeral directors had the challenge of driving long distances over dirt and country bumpy roads in horse-drawn carriages to care for the dead at the family home. When someone died at the home, they were laid on the cooling board for purposes of preservation, and the funeral director had to provide ice for the cooling board to keep them cold. In these rural communities, the deceased was often casketed and viewed in the family home. And I want to interject this little fact in there. in the embalming process back in those days, they would actually use the bathroom and use the tubs for the embalming. So when they went to embalm, they would take you to the bathroom and kind of lay you beside the tub, and everything that was taken out of you just went in the tub. So that's kind of an interesting fact for embalming. In your home. All right. In the 1920s, blacks moved into the industrial cities to get good manufacturing jobs. Blacks were allowed and encouraged to go to mortuary school and start businesses in order to service the increasing numbers of blacks that were moving into the cities. Racism and prejudice were alive and well, and white businesses preferred not to handle black bodies. Because of this issue, blacks were forcefully encouraged to open their own funeral homes to service black communities. It was common practice for blacks to convert the bottom floor of their private home into a funeral home, which were most popularly called funeral parlors. Some black funeral homes still have the mortuary on the bottom floor of and the resident on the top. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, black businesses began to spring up in the cities. Restaurants, cafes, barbers and beauty shops, insurance companies and offices, food stores, theaters, hotels, shoe shine clubs, etc. thrived for a period. They were the only businesses where blacks were welcome and not subjected to white-only signs and sections. With integration, however, many black businesses began to fail because blacks were allowed to begin to do business with white establishments, but whites rarely patronized black businesses. It has been said that only 4 institutions in the African American community survived desegregation of American society: the black church, the black beauty salon and barbershop, the black cocktail lounge, and the black mortuary. The black mortuary was unique because it started as a family business and was passed on from generation to generation. The black funeral director is a community member who has traditionally been trusted, respected, viewed as a leader, and seen as compassionate, knowledgeable, and resourceful. Funeral service is and has long been a worthy profession. The history of the African American funeral service is long and rich, that dates back to ancient Egypt, continued through slavery, the Civil War, and integration. Blacks have had a long legacy and expertise in compassion for, and commitment to the funeral service. Now I want to bring this a little bit to our community here in Bartow County to speak on the black funeral homes that have been here. And some of this information I just learned this week, as I have always, since I've been here over the past 12 years, or past 10 years, I only thought that has been 2 funeral homes here in Bartow County, which was Knight and Patton, and now got bought out and turned into Mack, Eppinger and Sons. But to my knowledge, between the 1940s and 50s, Mr. Robert Lee Jack Knight opened Knight Funeral Home. So there was Knight Funeral Home here in Bartow County in 1952. Between 1940s and 50s. In 1952, Mr. James Patton Sr. opened a funeral home, and it was Patton Funeral Home. So somewhere around the timeline of 1962 and 1963, I guess there wasn't enough support for the 2 black funeral homes in the community. So the Knights and Pattons, they merged, and they became Knight and Patton Funeral Home. And they continued on until around the mid-80s. And then in 1985, Mack Eppinger Sr. purchased Knight and Patton, and that is currently now Mack Eppinger and Sons Funeral Service, which is right over on North Bartow Street, which is where I'm employed at. Ms. Bridget Green is currently the Senior Funeral Director in full and continuous charge. And the Eppingers, they were in business. They started in the Marietta area, so they have over 70 years in business in the funeral service, but they have a generation. The grandfather started it, Bridget's grandfather started it, and then her dad was in it, and then Bridget is in it, Bridget and her brother, they're in it, and she also has a niece that's in it. So there are 4 generations of funeral directors, and collectively together, they have over 100 years of funeral directors experience. So I thought that's pretty awesome. And as for me, I'm first generation for my family. And I don't know if any of my children will follow in my footsteps, which I pray they do. But I'm first generation, and in hopes in the near future, I'm praying that I will be the next one to be the successor of Mack, Eppinger & Sons Funeral Service. All right. So that's a little bit about the Black funeral service. If anyone has any questions, I can try my best to answer them for you. Yes, sir. Knight and Patton was still currently the 210 North Bartow Street. Yes, sir. I'm not sure where Patton Funeral Home was. I was trying to get that information. I'm not sure where they were located, but I did know that they did have a funeral home here. Actually, I do know where it was at. It was on top of the hill in that little cut street. It just came back to my memory. I heard someone speaking about it. And I don't know the street, but it's a little cut street right up off of Jones Street that runs off, and they were located there on top of the hill. It just came back to me. I guess I was thinking so hard. I'm trying to figure it out. So yeah, that's where the Pattons were up on top of the hill, and the Knights were on Bartow Street, our current location. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You're allowed to not know this.
Okay.
I'm aware that around the time of the Civil War, that arsenic was used to preserve coins. Heard that one?
I've never heard of arsenic. No, ma'am. I've always heard it was formaldehyde.
Okay, well, this is before formaldehyde.
Okay.
So then you probably won't know what I was getting to in this is wonder how many Black people particularly died in the arsenic bomb.
Right.
I didn't even think of that.
Right. I don't know, and that's going to be something that I'm going to research because, and it's funny because even when I went to Gupton, they never said anything about arsenic. It's very interesting that it never came up.
Maybe what I learned was wrong, you know.
Well,
You know what I learned?
and to be honest with you, back before we have the tech to preserve a body, I mean, you know, it might have been one of those things where if you have, you know, a strong enough alcohol to yeah, let's use that. Preservation is preservation.
You never think about it where there were places where, as often happens with cemeteries on the hillside, they get washed out.
Right.
So there's a lot of people dying from the arsenic poisoning that way, as well as from the things.
Right.
So, hey, man, I think that's
Right. And it's kind of funny when we went into this whole COVID thing, and when they shut everything down, as when places went into the shutdown, when we went into the big shutdown, how everything just purified itself, how the earth purified itself, and you heard talk of how the Himalayas, which hadn't been seen in over 20 years, because the pollution had stopped, because we were pretty much at a standstill, everything purified itself. So you could see different stuff, waterways cleared up. And I just started thinking, I was like, you know what? They're always talking about, you know, we're using these poisonous chemicals and we're burying bodies and it's getting in the waterways and all that. I said, but if we allow the earth to do what the earth's supposed to do and truly purify itself and let everything go through the minerals of the earth and get back down to its source and then go back out to the ocean and come back around, then we wouldn't have these problems. We are the problems. We create the problem. So even with the chemicals that we use, because a lot of the chemicals that we use today, they're cancer causing. So we have to have the proper ventilation to keep these chemicals, you know, the airflow coming through so that we're not inhaling that stuff and causing harm to ourselves. Right. 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 Exactly. But if we use them properly, we won't have these issues. Right. Yes, sir.
Well, connected to what you're talking about, I know Southerners are some of the people that least use alternative methods. We have less cremations here than they do like on the West Coast and up north. We have less natural burial. What is your what are you seeing in the African American community around this?
In the African American community, we are traditional burials. It still stays traditional burial. Cremations for us, it used to be, we don't do that. It's just you don't talk about it, you don't discuss it. But now, as time has gone on, it's getting to be more popular in the African American community. And a lot of what we're seeing, and it's not like a direct cremation. Sometimes people will still opt to have the body embalmed and preserved, and they'll have a service. And then after the service, they'll send the body to the crematory. So, and like you said, I think it's just a part of demographics and cultural things, traditions, beliefs. Some people just don't believe in cremation. We did a Baja service. It's been probably 2 years ago. And they did no embalming. There was no embalming. We pretty much disinfected the body. They had someone to come in and to clean the body themselves with oils and spices and everything. And then they wrapped them in white sheets. And all you could see, all that was left was the face. And then there were only like probably 5 or 6 family members came to view. Then after that, we went to the cemetery and had a graveside service. So pretty much, and she had to be in a wooden casket. We couldn't put her in a metal casket. So they wanted her to pretty much just go back to the earth the way she came. So, yeah. You're welcome. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
You had talked about, particularly during the time of the slaves, where they would do funerals as a celebration of going home.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think about funerals, we more, maybe all of us are doing celebration of life. Do you think it came out of that celebratory kind of funeral service from the Civil War?
I think it probably did. I think it did because, as it was saying, slave owners, they were sad. It was a sad time for them, and they were losing their loved one. They didn't know, even if they did believe in God, they didn't know. But for black people that went through such a hard time, you were beaten and taken away from your families, and it was just a hard life. So anything beyond that was freedom, was a joy. And if you could see your loved one leave from being out in the fields in the hot sun and being beaten and whipped and tortured, and you see them leaving here, that's a celebration. That's great. And I think that's where we truly got the celebration from. And then as the white people would see, they sat back and they watched it. It's like, man, they're truly celebrating the life. They're celebrating. They're having a good time. So we need to pick up on that tradition. And the Bible also says, Pastor, I don't know the exact scripture, but it says, rejoice when a baby enters this world. Cry when a baby, weep when a baby enters the world, and rejoice when someone leaves. So now, as we have been enlightened in what we know about Christianity, or whatever your belief is, if you have the right faith, and if you believe in God and Jesus, and you know that there's life after death, eternal life and the good life, and you're going to heaven one day, then hey, let's celebrate this thing. We're leaving, as Pastor Randy Lives would say, we're leaving the land of dying and we're going to the land of the living. So yeah. Right. They're like a big family reunion.
Oh, yeah. And when my grandmother died, everybody said, oh, she could sorry, she missed the funeral.
Right. Right.
I mean, it was always a good time. And yeah, you felt sad, miserable, and you cried, but yeah, God and all, we were together, we were celebrating that life that we could see beyond our own situation.
Right, exactly. And I know my personal experience with death, with my grandparents when they passed away, and my great aunt, my uncle, when they passed, I looked at it. If they didn't have the quality of life, a good quality of life here on this earth, and I couldn't have them in the form where they're going to be up and jubilant and we're all having a good time, then if sickness has attacked their body and there's no cure for it, I would rather see them go on to be with the Lord than to be here on this earth and, we having to look at them in that way. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
How much of the technology has changed in the last 100 years? There's been a lot of changes, and pretty much the same as it was 100 years ago.
It has changed. Probably 100 years ago, You had all the old techniques. The chemicals have probably changed a little bit, of course, but like your machines, the machines that you use, it used to be where you had a contraction that was rigged up to the ceiling that had a almost like a I can't think of one of the old bags that you put hot water in and had that connected to come down out of it. But they put the fluids in that and have it clamped off, put the fluids in that, pour it in, have it connected to a cannula, injected into the artery. And then, they disconnect that and, hopefully they're getting good pressure because the higher up it is, the more gravity is going to pull. So that's how it originally started. And before that, it was probably even harder. But now we have machines. You set the machine right there. You have your connections. You flip a switch and you get your pressures right and your flow right. You flip that switch and it's connected, and hopefully you're getting good distribution throughout that body, and you go from there. So I'm sure it has changed several times over the past 100 years. I wish that I could go back or could have even had some videos to see some of the stuff, but I'm sure they called it I want to get the terminology right. I think it was a polinter. It was something they had hooked up. It was hooked up to a chain. It had like a little wheelie, and you could adjust it. And you adjusted it for your rate of flow. The higher up it went, the faster it goes. And then you bring it down, the lower, it's going to slow it down a little bit. So yeah, it has truly changed. If I had to do it that old way, my nerves wouldn't be, I'd be completely shot.
How long does it take from start to finish?
Typically from start to finish, for completely disinfecting the body to fully embalming, maybe about an hour and a half. And that's a good case. That's a case where, you're not having issues. Sometimes I may be back there for 4, 5, 6 hours on one body. And after I leave out of that, I'm like, okay, I want to go home. Yeah, but.
Did the techniques the Egyptians had, the embalming techniques, procedures and all, did that transfer into the rest of the Africans and the blacks and they bring it? So was it directly their knowledge, or did it come eventually get into the white community and then back into the black?
It probably started with the ancient Egyptians and then just kind of moved its way other places. And then when other people started finding out other ways, they just start interjecting different things. So it probably started out that way. And then, and I can't say for certain, but I know, from what the history says, the slaves had to take care of the white families as well. So I guess it was looked upon as they didn't want to have anything to do with that. They just wanted the body to be preserved, and then they would come back after the slaves had done everything. They would come back to see the body and everything, and then take it from there. So I can't necessarily say for sure that those techniques went from the Egyptians to the whites to other societies, because the Indians, they had their way of doing things. I think it was the Aztecs. Was it the Aztecs? Now you're gonna make me go back and get my book out. I have to go back. It's been 11 years since I graduated, Gupta. But they would do things as far as, because the Indians relied on the earth. They truly relied on the earth for everything, and they felt like when the person died, they felt like the soul had to travel outside the universe to other planets before it returned back to the body. So they would do things as far as just take the body and put them in a ball and put them up in a tree, so they could travel outside of the universe and then travel back to that body in whatever time frame. So yeah, like they didn't do the embalming. It was just natural. And then some of them just did a burial. Just go out there and dig a hole and bury them. So every culture and I guess everyone had their own things that they did. Yeah. So, yes, ma'am.
Funeral plots. Back in the old days, some families had their own plots. Again,
Mm-hmm.
like you were saying, the slaves just had to be buried, on the plantation somewhere, that sort of thing. In today's arena, are we allowed just to bury someone now, guys? Or is that happening?
Well, it can happen. It can happen. You would have to go through your city or county and get the permission for it. I know over in Floyd County, there's a family that I know that they bury on their property. When someone passed, I know they have at least the mom and dad and one of the children on the property. But what you run into with that is that if you ever want to sell that property, the value of it's going to be very low. And then are you going to want to relocate that body from where it is to somewhere else? Or do you just put a gate up around it and say, this is y'all's and y'all come do what you want to with it whenever you want to? But it's going to depend on your county and your city if they will allow that. And like here in Cartersville, Oak Hill is full now. It's completely full. There's no more plots in Oak Hill. So now we have Sunset Memory Gardens, Providence Cemetery, or you have your church cemetery. And a lot of smaller churches, they have cemeteries, but they're filling up. And a lot of graves in those cemeteries are unmarked as well, because you may have someone that was buried there in 1852. And you may go out there and you get the pride, and they were buried in an old wooden casket. Well, that many years ago, that casket is completely gone now, probably. So you start digging up bones, and you've disturbed someone's resting place, but you didn't know it was there. So yeah. But yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of times, what are we going to do when we start running out of cemeteries and grave spaces? Where will we bury? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Occasionally we get people that come to the museum or in archive researching things, looking for, records,
Mm-hmm.
home records. Is Mack Eppinger or home, what kind of records you kept and are they accessible?
Our records that we keep, the actual files from where we bury, we keep those for 7 to 10 years. But we do have books that we have of everyone that we have buried from year to year. I think we have books that go back to 96, 95, 96. We do have books that go back that far. A lot of times you can always go to the probate court and see if they can pull up a death certificate for you. And then there's a cool website, findagrave.com. I found that to be one of the best resources in locating graves. And if they have a headstone or marker at that grave, then they go and they take a picture of that, and you can just have the first and last name, the date that they died or around, and sometimes you can just put the names in and they just pull up and you just kind of search the names. But a lot of times, if you didn't have a headstone or anything, it's kind of hard to do. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
As I became an adult and moved around to different towns, I realized that the word mortuary is almost exclusively used by black funeral homes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's just the general or white funeral home that uses the word mortuary.
Well, I'm going to tell you the difference. Yeah, sure. That's a good question. Because I often wondered, why is this a mortuary? Why is this a funeral home? But mortuaries were typically used, that term was used because the home or the mortuary was actually their home. But down on the lower level was the funeral home portion where they did the embalming and everything. And then the family lived upstairs. So those are your mortuaries or your older buildings. Prime example, and I'm not sure, there's not one that would put you in the mind of it would be Parnick Jennings. They typically kind of look like that. They were 2-story and a lot of times had a basement. And the first floor and the basement were used for funeral home purposes, but the family lived up above the funeral home.
But did they ever call it a wall?
Yes, ma'am.
They did?
Yeah, yeah. If
Where it exists today.
Oh, wow.
right, right. And it's typically what we have in like Mack Eppinger Sons. It's a funeral home. Owens, it's a funeral home. Harnick, if they wanted to term it mortuary, it has the look of a mortuary because it's a two-story, and typically at a establishment like that, it would be where the family lived upstairs and the rest of the building was the business. So that's your mortuary. It's like a more of an older building, and funeral homes are more modern and up to date. Yeah, that's right. Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And they probably, I mean, it was just if they wanted to call it funeral home or mortuary. But typically that's your mortuary. Yeah.
I love finding this in buying lights.
Right. Right. Yeah, you would think it would be different, but it's actually, and it's crazy that it's like that. And the one that from Rome, Rites Memorial Mortuary, that's what Rites Memorial Mortuary. And once upon a time, they lived upstairs, and the downstairs was their business. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That again plays exactly what I was going to ask, because I grew up in Rome. I've been to rites. It's probably the prettiest funeral home
Right.
in Polk County.
Right.
But for those of us who haven't been to Mack, can you describe it for us?
Yes, sir. Mack Eppinger it's a smaller firm. It's located right over here on 210 North Bartow Street. We have a chapel. We have 2 parlors or viewing rooms. And then we have our family room where we meet with the families. And then if we ever have visitations, they can congregate there. And then we have our office portion. Yeah. So it's not big, but it's big enough for us. Yeah. And actually, when it started out, Mr. Eppinger, Mack Eppinger, he actually added on a lot to that building because it actually started out with just the chapel area and the viewing rooms. And he actually he added a little breezeway and took it around and added the family room, took it on around. He added a bedroom and a kitchen, a full kitchen. And then it used to be a garage on a portion where the office is now. That was actually a garage. And the garage was downstairs, and then up above there was an apartment. So later on, I guess they just tore that down and made an office portion out of that. And then we went on around, and we have a 3-car garage. So yeah.
So how many hearses?
We have 2 hearses, we have 1 limo, and then we have a van. So our van, normally, we use that as our lead vehicle in funeral processions and to go pick up your loved ones. And then, of course, we have the 2 hearses and the limo. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
In today's society, I know when it started out, it was black, white, separated.
Right.
But in today's society, do you see where we're coming together? I heard you talking about how about, that you all did, but do you see that now, whites coming to what we say black funeral home, blacks going to what we say white funeral home, or is it now just considered funeral home?
I would love for it to just be funeral homes and we just truly, came together for everything. But people have their choice. They have their choice. And one day I'm hoping to break those barriers so that it's not the black funeral home and the white funeral home, and it is just the funeral home. You still have your choices, but we're going to just be diverse. We're going to serve you if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're black, if you're white, Latino, Indian. We just want to serve everyone. We're not looking at skin color. We're just looking at you with the love of Jesus. Yeah.
Do you have a clientele that
We have a good ratio, and it's growing. It's growing. And what we've seen is that whenever we did get one family, they kind of start referring other families. So those families, anytime someone passes in those families, they automatically come back to us. And then, and we service, I mean, just, it doesn't matter to us. We're just there to make sure that your loved one is given a professional, dignified service, and that everything is carried out properly. So we have probably about 5 or 6 families that just continuously utilize our services. But we're hoping to grow that. We're hoping to grow that even more. And then some people, like I said, it's personal preference. It's personal preference. You may have a relationship with the Owens or Parnick. Some have a relationship with us. And then a lot of families actually split. You know, they some go here, some go there. It's just their personal preference. So, but yeah, we're wanting to break the stereotypes and all of that, because we're all human. We're all human.
You have 2 years ago when basically all burials and stuff stopped?
No, sir. The burials never stopped. We did stop having church services, and they went to strictly graveside services. In the few services that we were having, we had them in our chapel, but we limited the people that could come, and I hated it. God knows I hated it worse than God hates sin, because I felt like we weren't giving the families what they needed to celebrate their loved one's life. My boss and I, Bridget and I, we would sit in the office. Everybody gets to see the good part of us going out. We're all happy and everything and taking care. But we would sit in the office, and I'm like, I just don't like, we would be fussing. Can we at least have 30 people? She said, no, the guidelines are 15. I said, but it's their loved one. I mean, we would be going back and forth about it. And I'm just like, I just don't feel right. I don't feel right. We can mask up, we can disinfect, we can do this. And, finally I was like, oh, I hate it. In every service we had, I said, I hate this. I hate it. I hate it. Because people aren't getting to celebrate their loved ones. So whenever we went through that whole phase of everything shutting down and start slowly opening back up, I was like, thank you, God, because it just bothered me. I mean, I'm a public servant, and I want to serve the people, and I want to give them my all. So yeah, we never shut down. We didn't shut down a single day. And we didn't care. We didn't care what the numbers were saying. We didn't care if you could get COVID from a dead body or whatever. We just gonna do what we got to do to protect ourselves and take care of our families. Yeah.
So were all y'all spared from?
Yes, ma'am. Now we've had it. We've had COVID. Actually, Miss Bridget, she was the first to have it. She had it before they actually put a name to it. She had it just before 2020. And right before they put a name to it. And she had a bad bout with it. But she overcame it, thank God. And she wasn't hospitalized or anything. But since then, she's had it again, but she's had her shots. She had it back during Christmas time. I had it back during Christmas time. And the one person, everyone in the office that's there full time has had it except for one person, that's our secretary. She's the only one, and we're grateful that she's okay and that she's been avoiding it. She's had her shots and everything, so God has spared her, and He spared us as well, because we had it and we fought it and we came right back. I would literally, when I had it back during Christmas and into the New Year, I told him, I said, look, this is what I'm gonna do. I said, I know I can't be around y'all. I said, but I can't be laying at home in no bed. I don't want to do that. I said, I'll just go in through the back door. I'll do what I need to do, and then I'll let y'all know, then I'm out of here. Oh, you want me to shut up now?
Years ago, when a baby would pass away,
Mm-hmm.
most of the times they would, at the morgue, at the hospital or somewhere, and then they would just discard them. But I noticed here lately, babies, you're actually having funeral service.
Yes, ma'am.
For the baby.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm thankful for that, because they are precious in God's eyesight.
Right.
But why do you think that happened?
Well, a lot of it, back in that time, if they allowed the hospital to dispose of their baby, it was their choice. A lot of times it was the family's choice or the mom and dad's choice. Now, a lot of people, they want to either have a service or they want to have their baby cremated and returned to them. So, and we give them that option. We want you to have that option, because if that baby, if it was, 16 weeks early, or gestational, or if it was a full term, that's still a baby. That's still your little baby, still a loved one, and we want to certainly honor that little baby. They have that right, so that's what we do. And it's just whatever your option. If you want to have a service and a burial, if you want to cremate, that's what we're going to do for you. Yeah.
One of the reactions to kids, 60, 70 years ago, was more likely because they didn't die. It was something,
Right.
but now we're being die less frequently. It seems more as a tragedy than it was something. That practical still has some juggling and since death, and they all have services, and it seems very appropriate, and we often talk about how weird it was at one time to do this contribution, but
Right.
now we're bringing around more of the family, and I think it's something we want to share, and it was more of we recognized
Right. Yeah. That's a good observation. Thank you.
Maybe this is a question for both of you. Do you see in the years that you've had trends of the service, characteristics of it? Are they getting more joyous? Are they getting longer, shorter? Maybe just on the attitude towards the person's death, or recognizing, I think, a lot more they're going someplace nicer, better, certainly within a Christian framework. But when we talk about, the funeral is so much of the party, is it still that way? Is it getting more that way? Is it less?
From, you want to go from your standpoint?
Yes. Yes, yes and no. Well, you still have your services, but you have your minister. That's your choice there again. And as Mr. Robbins was saying, it's up to the family what they want. And certainly a Christian family, someone that is in church and they want to have a service, a Christian service, then you go through that formality, that Methodism. You go through that. You have your prayer, your scriptures, you have your eulogy, you have your words of comfort, that sort of thing. You have your program, which would be outlined, which would be consisting, and which would include your bio, which is your obituary. That would be in the program, the lineup, and you would have pictures and that sort of thing. And then after the celebration, then you go and bury, and after that, the repast. Everybody's joyous. So that's where the jubilant part come in. And then at some funerals, some people might say, well, listen, I don't want this sad and long and drawn out. I want this thing to be, 5, 10 minutes, no more tops 30 minutes. Then you got to make sure you take care of that. And of course, people like Mr. Robbins, the funeral home, like he said, will not be late.
Won't be late. I'll be late for everything else. Won't be late for that.
We don't have to study. We got to just get your robe on, let's go. So we're there at that door, and we're from the sun down the aisle, your body in the pulpit. We're eyeballing them. They're like this. Okay, I'm out. And if you don't, we see them marching down that aisle. So yes and no. It is. It's joyous. I pretty much can say just about every funeral that I've gone to, and then afterwards, of course it's sad, but afterwards with the hugging and the celebrating and remembering the good time, everybody knows pretty good what they need from that. We'll see you later.
Right. And also it depends on the circumstances surrounding the passing.
Right.
A lot of times, if you have people that are older, that have lived great lives, they 70, 80, 90 years old, they've had a great life. So it's truly a celebration. The family's glad, like, hey, they're going to a better place. We still here to have to deal with this crazy war that we're going into now. So it's stuff like that. But then when you have tragedies, like the young people that pass away from car wrecks or gunshot victims or just all the craziness of life, drug overdose and stuff like that, those are typically your harder services where the family is not as upbeat. So you're trying to give them some kind of comfort and joy to get them to that point. And a lot of times when you have the tragedies like that, they are truly grieving. They go through it. That some people go through it for years. It may be 20 years before it finally clicks. And they be like, hey, and some people, they never get over it. I had an uncle, right. You never really get over it, but you pray that every day gets better than the day before. Right. His daughter, in 1987, she was killed tragically in a car accident. Her family, they had been out for a vacation. They were coming back home. She got killed. Her brother got killed. Her little sister got killed in a car wreck. Her grandmother was injured real bad, and her brother was, but they survived. My uncle, from the day that she died until the day he took his last breath, which was in 2015, he never got over her death. He never got over her death. And I think that's one of the things that contributed to some of the depression and some of the things that he went through in life, because he grieved her from the day she died until he passed away. And it's like there's an elephant in the room. No one would never speak of it to him. You never talked about it. And then me, being the rebel kid in the family, one day we had a high level discussion. And I just told him, I said, you know what one of your problems is? I said, the main problem that you have is that you never got over your daughter's death. You don't talk about it, and you live harboring that inside your heart. Talk about it and start to release it. And that'll make life a little bit easier for you. You won't be in such a deep depression. And he never talked about it. But then after I told him that, it changed the dynamic of our relationship, because I was brave enough to see it where everybody else in the family wasn't. Well, look, they talked to him, and they're like, I can't believe you said that. I'm like, but y'all talk about it. Y'all talk about it when he's in the next room, but y'all won't say it when he's in the room. Come on now. How does that work?
Would you mind if I say something real quick?
Yes, sir.
So I'm the program manager here at the museum, but what some of you may know, may not know, is I wrote my PhD on funerals in the South.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So to answer your question, most people don't realize how lucky they are to have funeral homes like this still in towns, because they're embedded in the community and really local and really caring, and that you have these generations. Some major companies, SCI, Dignity.
There you go. Yeah.
So what they do is they're these huge corporations, and they come in and they buy local funeral homes, and they buy their names.
Mm-hmm.
And so people think they're still going to their Carter Jennings,
Owens.
Daniels.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they think they're still going to their local family funeral home, and it may even be some of the same people working there, and they're doing the best. Those people are not bad people, but because they now work for this big corporation, they have to use their products and their
sales.
Sales.
Yeah.
Sales quotas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's if you've started to notice that things seem to look like they're changing, it's because a lot of people are using the sort of personal care and
Right.
touch that a lot of us grew up using.
Right.
Being used to.
And I'm gonna sit down after I say this. I'm not gonna, but I'm glad you touched on that, because as you were saying, corporate funeral homes, they don't care about you. I mean, I'm just gonna put it out there, and a lot of people aren't gonna see it. I'm just one. I'm blunt and honest enough to see it. They don't care about you. You're not going to get the service. If you go to a locally owned or a family-owned funeral home, you're going to get much better quality service. You're going to be treated like you're part of their family, and then your prices are probably going to be sliced in half. I can guarantee you, if you go to, and I'm not, if you go to SEI or any of those big companies, I can guarantee you, before you even start to look at a casket or even get a general price list, they're going to say to me, do you have insurance? How much is your policy? And if you got a $50,000 policy, they're going to try to get you $40,000 of that policy left at that funeral home and leave you with 10. Opposed to if you go to a locally owned funeral home, I don't care what your policy is. All I care is that it's active, that it's going to pay. That's all I care about. I'm not going to ask the amount of it. I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to collect some information. We'll go to our selection room. We're going to look at some caskets. Everything about this service is going to be listed on top of that casket. By the time we make it from that selection room back to the table, you're going to know just about what you're spending. And I guarantee you, if you were to come into Mack, Eppinger & Sons funeral service, you probably won't go out of there with no more than a $10,000 service. It's going to be ranging between $7,500 to $10,000. That's traditional burial. And if it's a cremation or a service with a cremation after that, you're probably looking at $5,000. Direct cremation, $2,200. Yeah.
That's true, so many of them, you have to ask your doctor, particularly veterinarians. There are very few veterinarians services now that are owned by that business.
Right.
They're part of something.
Right, corporately owned.
You can tell, you go to that, and they say, well, you need to have this shot for me, this shot, and this patient, you ever heard of it before? They ask you,
Right.
that's the same.
Right. It's the same. It's sales. It's sales.
It's all sales.
It's sales. And that's another reason I got out of banking. That was another reason and I'm gonna sit down. I know now I'm on a tangent. Now I'm on a tangent. Okay. Yes, ma'am. That's a great question, because over the past 2 years, we've seen such an increase in passings. We went from being averaging 75 cases a year to now we're in triple digits. We hit triple digits. And I'm not talking about, I mean, you go from 75 cases to 150 cases, that's a lot. And it was funny because I was talking to my boss about it one day. I said, Bridget, I said, this is getting pretty depressing. I said, because I never imagined that we would be going from the numbers that we were in to this such an increase. I never thought, I've never seen the funeral industry this rush. I said, so it's kind of depressing. So I told her, I said, when we have breaks in between services, I said, I'm probably gonna start taking a day or two off just to go out and ride my motorcycle, or make sure I'm spending time with my kids, just doing stuff just to decompress. Because I mean, at one point it got real heavy. It was real heavy. So you have to have a relationship with the Lord, and then you gotta have to know how to pull back. You have to know when to say when, because it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop, and it's just going to keep going. But you just have to just kind of pull back on them reins, be like, hey, we're going to stop this wagon for a minute. Yes, ma'am, we've seen a lot of what, and that it's a combination. It's a combination of the COVID and the baby boomers. Yes, ma'am, the generation of baby boomers. And that's what we were discussing also. I said, now we're at an age where, was it World War II? A lot of people were born in that World War II era then. So what you're seeing now is a lot of people in the 40s and 50s and 60s, they're starting to pass away now. People aren't living as long as, a lot of people don't make it to 80 and 90 years old. So you got people. Right.
I want what your
Right.
your own.
Right. Exactly.
So they are coming to
Exactly.
more.
Right. Right.
Double-edged sword of success.
Right. Yeah. I would never, I tell people I would never be one that's out pushing sales or anything. If anything, I'm going to be out meeting people, letting them know that we're here to provide you quality service, that we're not trying to break the bank, that my new slogan, whenever I own the funeral home, a portion of it is going to be where you are my family. You're not going to be business or clientele. You're going to be part of my family. When you walk through the door and you sit down with me, and after we finish everything, oh, I'm part of your family. Don't be surprised if hey, what's for dinner? So there you go. So yeah, yeah,
That's why you're out of bank,
right.
because it changed.
It went completely south.
Families coming in saying, it's not that.
Right. I don't think Cartersville has a United Community Bank. Do we have a United Community? We do have a United Community. One of the best banks that I can tell you about is United Community Bank. I went to work for them in '99. That's who I went to work for. And they were strictly customer service based. They didn't push sales. They didn't do any of that. It was customer service. If you provide good customer service, the business is going to come, because who you have in there, your customer that you have in there, you're going to provide them such great service, and you're not going to sell them something that they don't need. You're going to provide them with exactly what they need. So if you see them, if they have a checking account and they got $500,000 sitting in, it's not making them any money. You tell them, if you're not going to use that money, move it into this account. You're giving them what they need. You're not selling. And then I'm not going to give you a credit card that you don't need and you're not going to utilize. If you need the credit card, I'll let you know we have it. If you need it, get it. If you don't want it, okay, fine and good. But I just want to give you such good service that, you come in here, hey, Mr. Locke, it's good to see you today. How are the children? You know that you build up that rapport with your people and everything. You build that. That's what you want. It's the same way with the funeral industry. I'm not trying to get rich off of selling you all this stuff that you don't need. I'm not going to even, if you don't need it, I'm not going to even bring it in here in the first place. And if it's something that you want, if you let me know you want it, of course I'll get just what you want. But I'm just not going to just be pushing all this stuff on you to make money off of you. That I'm not going to do. It's not going to happen. I'm here to take care of you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Mack Eppinger Funeral Home, right around the corner. No, man, I worked at the one in Rome. I was 3 years at United Community and 6 years with Citizens First. And Citizens First was sales, which is Nesta Novus. Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We could have some good conversations. Yeah. I can tell you why I left the banking industry, but call me back on another day.
We'll continue the conversation.
You thought this was going to be a 15-minute presentation.
Right.